Super Effects brings 3D to the Super Nintendo. NeoGeo breaks the 100 meg barrier. And the 1200 brings the Amiga into the modern age. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. Today we're heading back to November of 1992. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined today by a new everybody's favorite co-host. You know him from our FCC special and our recently released two-part The Crash 40th Anniversary episodes, the man who knows more about regulation than, well, something that knows a lot about regulation. It's Dale.
Hey, Carol. Thank you. Glad to be here and be your favorite co-host.
As every other co-host also is. So, yeah, I've been wanting to have you on the show as a co-host for a while now. I mean, we've had our run-ins, and you've been on the show already once. We did a whole extra episode just on the FCC regulation changes back in the late 70s. So give everybody who may not be familiar with you a brief rundown of your bona fides in this area.
Sure. Here in 1992. Well, it wasn't in the 70s we did our show, but it was a few years ago. I'm Dale. I'm basically a amateur enthusiast video game historian, like so many other folks in the in this group that we have, or in our community. I've been doing this for a bunch of years. I met you a bunch of years ago, and we did a special on what was kind of my specialty or my area of expertise that I've done way too much research in, and that is the 1979 FCC regulation environment and all the stuff that happened there. There's an entire 2-hour insane podcast that still exists on the internet with us for anyone who wants to go back into that. Since then, I've been doing a bunch of research, mostly with the community around Gaming Alexandria. And that's been productive and helpful and fun. I have a number of other kind of weird esoteric interests in the video game history world, but for the most part, they're focused around early video games, stuff from the 50s, 60s, and through the 70s. Once we hit about this, we're reaching the point about the lack of my expertise, because in my own life, this is when I was into adulthood, and so video games were a different beast in 1992 for me. So, but yeah, that's basically my background. I don't have much in the way of anything to promote or push. I am still one of the holdouts on Twitter at @83. So you can find me there if you want to.
But you have moved to Mastodon as well.
But like so many others, I've staked my claim in a Mastodon instance somewhere, which I'm now working on trying to figure out how to turn back into the community that I enjoyed at Twitter, yes. But that's about it. The only thing I'd really promote is between that and Gaming Alexandria is where I hang out and talk video games, early video games.
And anybody who is interested in this topic and you want to know more, the Gaming Alexandria Discord is definitely an amazing resource.
Highly recommended.
Yeah, which I wish I could spend more time on, but I'm usually preparing the next episode of this show. So if you do find any messages from me over there, it's usually just me asking, hey, does anybody know anything about this? And then people usually ignore it because it's too obscure. So there you go.
You've landed on a couple of it. You know you've done well when you can ask a question that no one there can answer.
This
and
is
you're
true.
You're truly on your own. You've broken new ground when you can throw something out and no one gets back to you at that place. But yeah, I highly recommend it. And so yeah, that's kind of that is my background, and I'm joining you here for this ritual.
Yes. Oh, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. So, let's get the everyday disclaimers out of the way. Remember, everybody, that for the purposes of our episode, we are using the cover dates of newspapers and magazines. So, obviously, all the news happened at some point before November of 92. It's just a framing device. Don't send me any letters. And we are also, like we just said, on all the social medias, links in the show notes, and of course also links to everything that we talk about, and our sources are also in the show notes. Before we can turn on the time machine, though, we have an order of business. Our segment, The 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-hosts must play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated November 1992 that they have not played before for 7 minutes. Now, we had a lot of games to choose from. There was so much coming out right before Christmas. We've got the Super NES Mega Classic Super Mario Kart. We had the European exclusive and obscure Elite for the NES. We had licensed stuff like Bart's Nightmare and Roadrunner Death Valley. Great games. Not really. And arcade mega games like Golden Axe 2 Revenge of Death Adder. But we went with, and one of the games that's closest to my heart, the Amiga Classic Pinball Fantasies. So, Dale, are you ready to hit that silver ball?
I am.
Excellent. Then let's get to it. Welcome back, Dale. So, for the uninitiated who have not played Pinball Fantasies, how would you describe the game based off of your 7 minutes with it?
Oh my god, what you people are missing so much. You need to sign up for the Patreon right now and go see an old man lumber around with an electronic pinball simulation. It was awesome. No, it took me back. We were describing at the time that this is the archetype, really, of the sequel to the archetype of pinball simulations for the 16-bit computer. It debuts on the Amiga. It plays faster than anything you could have imagined at the time. Is it a real pinball machine? No, but it makes up for some of that by having a diversity of tables that you can have that are different themes, and it's modular as well, so I'm sure that they had expansions planned or additional tables plugged in for their releases. Great action on it. And other than that, it left me, like I said on the other stream, you knew it was a well-designed pinball table because you should be left after your second or third game confused as all get out as to what you're supposed to be doing and thinking deeper about where to put the ball, what shots you want to make. So there's lots of reward in that. There was even a slot machine that came up there at one point, and I won 3 bars and 500,000 points, and was hugely excited. So, yeah, great game. Digital Illusions.
Yeah, Digital Illusions, better known as DICE nowadays, makers of the Battlefield series, and these guys basically just little more than teenagers at the time of making these games. I did check out, they made at least 2 more pinball games, Pinball Illusions on the Amiga, and then they also tried to branch out with it onto consoles, PlayStation era stuff, but they basically then diverged off into racing games and first-person shooters and the like. So pinball was left by the wayside, unfortunately.
Poor pinball. It is amazing that pinball manages to extend its life into the mid-90s on the PC on the home computer, home system, that we would continue to go back to that.
That is true. Although, I mean, in the arcades, pinball is going through a bit of a renaissance at this point due to the incorporation of more and more digital equipment in the machines. The Addams Family Pinball has just been crowned the best-selling flipper pinball table of all time. And so there is a renaissance going on. We're still a couple years away from getting the best tables of all time. Things like Attack from Mars and Medieval Madness. But yeah, it's definitely in the air, and it's interesting to see that is as big as it is. Maybe in part because consoles are getting better and the arcade is losing a little bit of its luster, but, you know, it's fun. So, would you recommend this game to other people?
Yes.
That is a glowing endorsement right there.
Hopefully you're inclined to play pinball. If you are,
yeah.
You may enjoy this game.
Yeah, and this is one where the emulation can sometimes be a little bit wonky just if you're not getting as many frames per second as the original hardware would be giving you, because the scrolling routines on the original are very, very good. This is one where original hardware or FPGA is the best way of experiencing it. So, okay, then before we can turn on the time machine, we have one more stop, and we have to check in with our good friend Ethan for the Department of Corrections.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan, to the Department of...
Come on. Let's go.
Let me try
No. We're continuing on. There's no second guessing here at the Department of Corrections.
No second guessing. Okay, then let's hit it. So, what did I get wrong in October of 1992?
Well, hold on a sec, Carl. We got something to say. To John. For it's the John comment this time. John was calling those little, like, trigger things that you have on, like, the 80s and 90s pinball machines. He said they were cool. I'm like, no. Those suck. Give me a launcher any day.
See, I agree in some games it's completely pointless. In other
games, doesn't feel good.
Well, Terminator 2, for example.
I've played that one, and I do not... No, I completely disagree.
Oh, the skill shot that you can get with it is a beautiful timing issue because it's the... Yeah, okay.
I need that physics. I need more physics in my pinball games, not less. And nowadays, they like try to take out the plunger entirely and just give you a button. And that's disgusting. I don't care about timing. It's all about the physics. We're going to get into October of 1992.
So, what did I get wrong?
Okay. So, it is time to, once and for all, put to bed your slanderous rumors on the Nintendo CD-ROM.
Oh, you're so going to hate this the episode today.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. Foreshadowing, everybody.
I mean, you already went off last time, so...
Oh, no, it gets worse this time. It gets so much worse this time.
Okay, so... Let's get this down and let's get it. So, it took me a while to go and find this, but there is something that Steve Lynn, kind of famous collector in the scene, he found this technical conference that Nintendo put on in February of 1993. And at this, they handed out to the developers who came the system specifications of the CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo they were working on with Philips. It does indeed have a coprocessor, and
now, I'm going to stop you right here. The Stephen Lin, he only posted a handful of pages. Have you read the complete document, which is up on gamingdoc.org?
I didn't think that it was entirely up because I went and asked people.
The whole thing is there. I read through it. And if you want to actually figure out how to program this thing based off of that, it's little more than this would be a really nice thing if it ever happened. It's so vague. It's disturbing.
Carl, do you
because
think
the
that
second
Nintendo
half of the
called...
document...
No, Carl, you shush
I'm just
right
saying.
now.
Okay. You need to read the whole document before you make
called a conference, brought over developers, and printed out this entire thing just to show up Sega. This was never reported. They didn't make it, out into the press that this is something they were doing. If you think they did this purely for a marketing stunt, I'm just gonna have to.
Not for a marketing stunt. Remember, they don't want third parties developing cool games for the Sega CD. They want to keep these guys building software for the Super Nintendo. Similar to the way Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger were originally going to be on a CD system that never appears. They don't want these guys jumping ship going, wow, now we could have RPGs with spoken language and all this stuff. They don't want them jumping ship to Sega. So have a conference for them.
RPGs doesn't really factor into Nintendo of America's deal. But regardless, I'm just going to say that this is as much proof as I need to say that there was something being worked on. It was not it did not just vanish into the ether.
Number one, we discussed this last time. I looked up the Oxford definition of vaporware, and this does qualify as vaporware. Vaporware, and I shall read, quote, software or hardware that has been advertised but is not yet available to buy, either because it is only a concept or because it is still being written or designed. This is vaporware. Second,
just as every console that eventually comes out in its time was vaporware. That's a terrible definition. I'm just going to say.
It's vaporware until it actually shows up. And like I said, you'll have plenty to enjoy in this episode. But I will also put a link to that entire doc in the show notes so everybody can see the second half of the document, or more than the second half of the document, is a fundamental explanation of what a CD-ROM is. Which, it's completely
not a lot of people have actually worked with one.
It's completely generic. It makes this is such a fluff piece. It's scary, but okay. And it's not the same copy as Stephen Lynn's, because in Stephen Lynn's there were some handwritten notes. They're not available on this one. This is a separate copy of the document that Gaming Docs has. But the pages do line up with the one Stephen Lynn posted. So, but this is neither here nor there. Let us move on.
Okay. Carl's wrong, as usual, and let us keep going. So, next, you discussed the Galaxian 3 installation. I forget exactly what the context was. You said there was only one, but there were, in fact, more than one. Namco had these at several different locations.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if they had more than one. I could only confirm the one, but okay, that's cool.
There have been people who have looked into this, and a lot of those kind of interesting experiments, like the one we recently did on Gaming Alexandria with Scramble Training with Michael Jackson. That was done at multiple locations as well.
Oh, cool.
And then the problem with you were speaking to the issue of arcade machines not taking dollar things. So there's a couple problems with that. One is the expense of a bill reader, because the security on a bill is very different from the way it works on a coin with a piece of metal, because it is very difficult to counterfeit coins with an exact metal amount that have the same magnetic stuff, and that's a whole thing. But the main problem with using dollars in an arcade setting is convenience. Basically, we never got there because we decided to skip over that and do cards instead, because no one wants to put dollars into a machine.
Nobody wants to put dollars into a machine?
As in, now I want to play this game that is directly in front of me, have to fold out my entire wallet, take a bill out, and then put it in like that. That's too much effort for people.
I can understand not having it as the exclusive thing. It would have never been as something that prevented me from putting money into the machine. But
yeah, but then you're already at the point where it's like, okay, well, there's the impulse buy of just one thing to put in the machine.
Of course.
And then, yeah, there's a whole lot of issues with that, but I wanted to call
That's
it
true.
out,
That's
out
true.
That.
That is definitely true. And plus, I mean, there's a psychological effect of the dollar bill. The moment you move from coins to paper money, you suddenly think that it's worth more. And European listeners won't really know what I'm talking about because we have €2 coins. But yeah, there is a psychological effect when you move to bills.
Yeah, I don't, and I honestly don't know. Did they ever move to a euro price in Europe? In a lot of these machines? Because obviously there had to be a difference in coin conversion.
Oh yeah, definitely. The coin-based machines I've seen over here all just take.
But I'm talking games specifically, not
games. Yeah. I mean, the few times I've played pinball or arcade games over here, back in the day before the euro, they would take 1 or 2 mark coins. We didn't have 2 mark coins. We had 1 mark coins and 5 mark coins. And then later on and nowadays it's 1 or 2 euro coins.
All right, there's the answer.
Yep.
Okay, then you were searching for a game that you couldn't find the name of. Crazy Otto was the thing that predecessed Miss Pac-Man.
Yes, very true.
And then, as you're speaking about the capabilities of 16-bit consoles, I must slap you for saying 16-bit graphics. Do not say that, Carl.
I know. I should.
Unless you are
better.
saying that the graphic itself only contains 16 bits, in which case it is a very low-scale graphic. It is 4x4 in only 2 colors.
Or you could talk about 16-bit color.
That is,
as far as the palette is concerned.
But not a lot of things actually use 16-bit color.
That's true.
Neither the SNES or the Genesis is 16-bit color. They are weird amounts of color. But yes, don't say 16-bit graphics.
I won't. I meant to say the graphics typically associated with 16-bit consoles. But yes, you were completely correct. They are not 16-bit graphics.
Then the Mario Artist games for the Nintendo 64 DD. I don't know how you got on this subject. It's been a long time, Carl. The only 2 of those actually came out. I think they announced 4 or something, but only 2 actually appeared. The DD.
Yeah, we got on it because we were talking about Super Mario Paint, which had just been released, and we got off on. Because I believe there was a conversation about why don't they do this anymore. I said, well, they tried on the DD, and then we went off on tangents there.
Okay. As is the way of Carl. Tangent,
of course.
Tangent. Next. Metal Gear on the NES is the thing that was ported to other home computers, rather than the original being ported to the C64 and whatnot, on the MSX.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, we did not get the cool MSX2 version, and you should always call it MSX2 because it would not have run on an MSX.
True. There was the upgraded hardware standard.
Yeah, we were so disappointed. My buddy had an MSX, and we desperately wanted to play Metal Gear, and that was not going to happen. Well.
Until Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, which I do have, and I did try out Metal Gear for the MSX2 on there. Then Electronic Games, the magazine, that started in 1981, not 82.
Was there a Christmas issue or something?
There was a winter 81 issue. That was issue 1.
Gotcha.
And then the first dated one after that is January 82.
Gotcha.
Then ICOM Simulations. You called them a flight sim company. That is not really what they were. I forget if they even put out any flight sims, but their main thing was doing the point-and-click graphical adventures. They basically invented the point-and-click as far as a mouse is concerned.
Oh, really? I didn't
That
know
was their
that.
thing.
What games did they release?
What are they called? Shadowgate is the one that's most famous because it showed up on the NES. That's part of a series that I can't remember the name of right now. But basically, the first point-and-click, in modern terms, graphical adventure was by Icom Simulations on the Macintosh.
Yeah,
and that was their
Deja Vu. Deja
Vu, that's it.
Yeah, and that was point-and-click in the sense that you're pointing at stuff on the screen, but you're not moving a 3D character around. Or not moving a character around in an environment.
I mean, you are moving characters in environments, but it's not like King's Quest, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, you're not moving a sprite around. You're just clicking on items as if it was your first-person view of the environment. Yeah.
I don't know what the first... Well, I mean, technically King's Quest is kind of that. It just doesn't have a mouse, but yeah. That's a question for the genre freaks later. And finally... Origin Systems, Robert Garriott was the co-founder. He co-founded it with his brother Robert. Richard.
Okay.
Richard and Robert were co-founders of Origin. And actually, their father might have also been a founder. I don't know. I haven't seen the incorporation documents. Just on there to have somebody. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, I know the people who profited from the sale to EA were the four Garriotts. So mother, father, and the two brothers.
Yeah, but it could have been that they were given stock later or something.
That's true. That's true.
I don't know the full thing, but you said that there was only one. There was a founder of Origin Systems, but in fact there are co-founders.
Gotcha. And just as a side note, ICOM also did Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally. How the hell did that happen? Okay, sorry.
That is certainly a thing. But that's all for October of 1992. Carl, you may continue to flub in your general direction.
Excellent. Thank you as always, Ethan, for your service.
Hey, bye.
Oh, another episode of Ethan's never-ending pedantry. Well, I'm sure that it was all highly accurate, and except for the part about the CD-ROM and the Nintendo there.
Yeah, as we will see.
I may have even owned one of those. I can't recall for sure, but not meshing up with my memory, I'm afraid, Ethan.
No, and we're going to get deeper into the weeds, so don't worry about it. It's all good.
All right.
Okay. Enough of the mistakes of the past. Let's make some new ones. So let's turn on the time machine and head back to November of 1992.
Sega CD. 1992. Joystick to a whole new world.
Welcome back to November of 1992. Dale, what's our first story?
Well, here we are in November of 92. And our first story is the NeoGeo breaks the 100 meg barrier.
Art of Fighting, one of the growing group of one-on-one fighters for the NeoGeo, will weigh in at a whopping 108 megabits, a new record for a cartridge-based title.
Ooh.
Yeah, this was huge. Now, Art of Fighting is not going to go down as one of the greatest fighting games of all time. It's graphically impressive because it's the first one that does the zooming in and zooming out effects that the Neo Geo becomes so well known for in games like Samurai Showdown later on. And I think maybe even one or two of the characters ends up in the King of Fighters series later on. But it's just showing the Neo Geo is, because it's mainly arcade hardware, is willing to spend the extra money on those big storage capacities. So,
now, what did it retail for?
Oh, these games were going for a couple $100 at least. Sometimes
the games
more.
themselves, and how much was the Neo Geo setting me back in '92?
Ooh, in '92, a Neo Geo. Don't hold me to this, but I want to say 400.
Okay.
At a time when a bare bones NES, Super NES, has been reduced down to $99. Same thing with the Genesis. So yeah, the Neo Geo was definitely only if you had more money than sense.
Yes.
Especially because, at this point, the games are not that great yet. The really great Neo Geo games are still coming, and even those are primarily just arcade games, which, if you're playing at home and, you're constantly dying because it's designed to make you die so you have to pay more, takes a little bit of the fun out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
What became of Sega, similar to its DNA, was always in the arcade, hard to break from that model of game system, and you've spent the equivalent of thousands of dollars on your Neo Geo system. Maybe you wanted an adventure game instead of something that's giving you 3 lives and pummeling you to death, because it's also... this is a similar technology to what will get ported into the arcade as well.
Exactly.
It's
the same.
This is actually derived from what was coming from the arcade, no?
Well, the Neo Geo is 1-to-1 the arcade hardware. There is no hardware difference. So, it's the gameplay is really the problem here. They're going to try to remedy it a little bit when the Neo Geo CD comes out. We get the Samurai Showdown RPG, but, it's too little too late. It's just not going to happen. The system is great for what it does. It's a system that just can move sprites at an ungodly rate. But everything else is just like, not really all that interesting. Sadly. But speaking of interesting...
Next.
Yes.
Star Trek to go VR.
W Industries, makers of the Virtuality VR arcade hardware, have announced that they have licensed Star Trek: The Next Generation for use in their system. The game would put players in the role of Jean-Luc Picard as he faces off against a Romulan threat. The whole thing should be made possible through a new scalable hardware platform and lighter, less bulky headsets, and be available through dedicated mall locations organized by Edison Brothers, which has been investing in higher-end arcades following their purchase of Dave & Buster's in 1990.
Did they ever make it to market?
No, unfortunately not. This never actually takes off. There's some sketches online of, what these centers should have looked like. But no, unfortunately, this never takes off.
Where are we in Star Trek world in 1992?
1992?
Aren't they making movies about whales or something?
That was 1986. That was 86.
That's 96? Okay.
86.
Right. So
86.
That's 86. So we've long jumped the shark. They're not even making movies.
In 92...
Next Generation?
Next Generation has been running for quite a while. That we just, the previous summer, had the whole, Picard as the Borg cliffhanger. Yep. And Deep Space Nine is about to launch.
Okay, no, so it's highly relevant then.
It's
at least in my cultural milieu.
Yes, it's extremely relevant. Next Generation is huge.
That's what we're doing on Saturday nights. What are you doing Saturday? What do you mean, what am I doing on Saturday? You coming over to watch Star Trek? I hope it's not a rerun.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this was a good idea, but if you've ever seen the type of graphics the Virtuality system could give you, this was always going to be a somewhat limited concept.
Right.
And now Virtuality. Just remember, the Virtuality system is actually coming out of England, so it's showing up in North America a little bit later. And we also have a news report this month that the very first Virtuality Center has finally opened in St. Louis. We talked about this a few months back on the show that they were looking to open one up. And so now we're getting confirmation that it's opened up and it's in St. Louis.
This is going to be more than 50 cents per play, I feel like.
Oh,
like
yeah.
You guys are going to be asking for more than 50. It was bad enough when you asked for 50 cents. Now you're going to ask for $1.
I remember playing a virtuality system in an arcade in Florida. This would have been around 96, 97, and it already then cost me about $1.
Oh, I'm sure. That actually sounds like you got a steal then. I was thinking $10 for 3 minutes.
No. They're not going that insane with it.
Right.
But, you're probably a couple bucks per go is not unheard of.
Right.
But, new tech. What are you going to do? And arcades got to make money.
So true.
Yeah. So, speaking of arcades.
WMS buys Aladdin's Castle. Can't it be a gambling outfit?
Yeah. Amongst others. They also have the fitness studios, the Bally's Fitness.
They ruin everything, those guys. All right,
come on. They also gave us some really good games.
Williams is Defender.
There you go. And Robotron.
From Defender from Robotron. All right.
Yeah. So, WMS Industries, parent company of Williams Bally Midway, has repurchased the Bally's Aladdin's Castle chain of arcades from investment group Westray for $25 million. Westray bought the chain from WMS in 1989 for $80 million, but is unloading it together with debts at a discount as many of the arcades require new equipment and updating.
You took a bath.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how much
took a $65 million bath.
I don't know how much debt is involved here. That's the number I don't know. If it was $65 million in debt, then
50. I should have said $55 million. I did the math wrong, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. So
it's hard to say how bad a deal it is, but obviously, they're getting it back at a discount. And now, granted, we're still off. The arcade is not the arcade of the early 80s. We've been talking about this in the show. The video game crash is also in part an arcade crash. So, at its peak in 1983, the chain boasted 450 arcades. At the time of the sale to Westray, so the sale in 1989, it had 315 locations. And when they get it back, they're only getting 275 locations back. Right.
So,
That's a good bellwether for when the arcade died around that time.
Yeah.
Or when particular locations would close or consolidate, perhaps.
Well, you would consolidate, and you also have, again, a phenomenon we've been talking about is the rise of the family entertainment center. So, Aladdin's Castle as a mall arcade is finding it, I think, harder and harder to, engage with the clientele because, there's just too many options at home. It's why should I pay 25 cents a play or 50 cents a go to play Street Fighter 2 in the arcade when I've got the cartridge at home on my Super Nintendo?
Right.
Yeah. So they're gonna have a harder and harder time, and the mall arcade is all but dead today. And this is going to be one of the contributing factors. It's just, the changing times and the fact that, it's just not really necessary to have an arcade to play video games.
It's true.
So, what's next?
Bill Clinton defeats George Bush to become... No, hold on. Okay, no, that does happen at this time, though.
That is true. That is true.
Thanks to Ross Perot. All right.
Thanks to Ross Perot. Yes, very true.
Music downloads come to CoinOp.
As it was with video games, Coin-Op is ahead of the curve with new digital jukeboxes that can store songs in as little as 2.5 megabytes on hard drives and access vast libraries of titles over ISDN lines. Operators are worried that these new devices will make locations jukebox independent, as they won't need continuous replenishment of discs.
Oh, little do you know that Napster is just a decade away. Less. Even less.
Well, yeah, but when you think about it, this is, I mean, have you used a jukebox in the last 20 years in a bar?
I have, but it was at a place where I sought it out because it actually uses 45s and is only of interest because of its obsolescence. But yeah, what exists of a jukebox nowadays is an MP3 player. Yep.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that they were showing this off this early.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really, really early. I don't know how much penetration these things got already back in the early 90s, but I was still using a CD-based one at my haunt as a college student in the late 90s. And in the back room, they did have an old one with 45s. So,
right.
But yeah, in the front room, it was still a CD jukebox.
Mass random music access doesn't exist in 90. I mean, there is if you're very wealthy, you'd have a 5-disc changer, and those were an atrocity. The idea of having digital music like that, even though there were CDs. When does the CD hit?
The first major album release with a CD and LP vinyl at the same time was Dire Straits. It's the one with the blue cover with the banjo looking.
Yeah, Brothers in Arms.
Brothers in Arms. That's the first one that gets both.
I think that's like 88, 89.
No, that's way early. Brothers in Arms is like 83, 84.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
But now there had been CDs before that. But that was the first major release that comes out simultaneously on both formats.
Right. Well.
So, yeah.
We never did end up lugging around our 2.5 megabyte hard drives with us for single songs.
No, we did not. I mean, and hard drives at this point, I mean, you 100 meg hard drive is a possibility. It's not ideal, but it is a possibility. And I think the ISDN line is really what's making it up. But when you think about a jukebox, you're talking about a machine that's costing you several $1,000s.
Right.
And if you can access all this updated music without having to constantly buy new records, I can see where the cost benefit even at this point would be. But I think this is largely going to be a Japanese thing at this point.
Right. So, I'd have to turn to the Department of Corrections to get an assessment on where the jukebox industry, what they were doing in 1992. I mean, I know they still existed, but at that point, I feel like they've been browbeaten pretty heavily.
Actually, in 92, there's still a contingent of them, according to what I've seen in the trade press, a contingent of the jukebox industry that's still sticking to 45s.
Right.
That have not, I mean, the CD jukebox is the new hotness. I don't think there's anybody still manufacturing jukeboxes that use 45s. But there's a lot of operators that are sitting on mountains of 45s, sitting on lots of inventory using 45s, and are still a bit hesitant about moving to CD.
Right.
So, but and this is also the time period where the jukebox is becoming more of a, it's a nicety to have. It's like a luxury item to have in a bar. But more and more locations are reliant on piped-in music and the threat of new online services or services through cable companies.
Right. Streaming music services are now starting. The Muzak has proliferated from being just elevator music to being something that won't make people gag while they're in your restaurant.
Exactly. And because there, and this is something that trades are, we've talked about on the show before, but the trades are all over it. Even this month, there's at least 1 or 2 articles about this. How new decisions by the FCC on what the cable companies can transfer, what kind of services they can sell,
right,
are giving operators a lot of pause, because if they can start transmitting video games. Now, granted, in 1982, they're also worried about this already.
Sure.
But if the cable companies can offer a ton of music channels that, no ads, specific types of music, so you have your honky-tonk channel for the honky-tonk bar and so forth.
Right.
Those are real threats to these operators.
By the way, Brothers in Arms, May 1985.
85. Okay.
And the lead-off track, So Far Away, was truly meant, the strings and the steel guitar at the intro of that were a good explicit highlights of the fidelity of the compact disc. I do remember first hearing it and going, holy crap. That sounds amazing. Well, it was the very first time you never heard without hiss.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as extremely high fidelity without either the scratch of a record or the Dolby hiss of the magnetic tape.
That's true. Now, I was a very late adopter of CD, and then I still had a really, really crappy CD boombox.
Oh, I wouldn't have one for another 10 years. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, this was in a store that I heard it, but I was like, wow. Right.
I just remember in the early 2000s, I repurchased most of my Weird Al Yankovic collection that had been cassette tapes up until that point.
Right.
And the first time hearing them on CD was a revelation. It was like, no, they must have re-recorded it. It can't be the same thing I've been listening to for 10, 15 years at this point.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Amazing.
Imagine what the masters sound like.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you'd think that, if you remastered and released it on streaming, that you would get that additional fidelity. But, alas, I don't think anybody's spending the money for that.
Yeah. Some of the masters have been lost in fires as well, but let's not go there.
That's true, too, unfortunately. But, oh well. Okay, let's move on. We're leaving the arcade. We're going to console.
Consoles? Why, that's Nintendo. And Nintendo announces the Super FX.
Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi unveiled the company's new RISC add-on chip, the Super FX, at the Shoshinkai show in Japan. The new chip will allow Super NES games to display 3D objects and even manipulate textures. It is not the first add-on chip for the Super NES, with both first-party chips enhancing games like Super Mario Kart, as well as third-party chips like Sega's SA1, which boost the system's speed to 10 megahertz.
Blasting 10.
Oh, yes. Well, considering that this was, a 16-bit version of a 6502, 10 megahertz was a huge deal.
By all rights, it should have melted.
Exactly. So yeah, this is a big deal. This is coming in the context of the Sega. Now, this show is in August, so of course, this is always the conceit of the show. We're looking at when the publication dates. So by the time the news is getting to the West, it's in a November issue. But he announces this. And Ethan and I will we've had words about this already during the Department of Corrections, but this is the same show where Yamauchi announces that Nintendo has shelved its existing CD-ROM plans and instead would now pursue a 32-bit CD-ROM add-on that would be worthy of CD technology. And that's, of course, a not too subtle dig at Sega that has already launched a Mega CD in Japan a while back, at around the same time as launching the Sega CD in North America. And, of course, the Sega CD adds essentially what were Mode 7 style effects to the Genesis hardware. And this is, of course, the Super FX is like, oh, but now we can do something else. And Yeah, so it's basically Yamauchi just, trying to keep people on their toes of like, well, wait for our next console, because the Super NES CD was supposed to be out in January of 93, but, now we're going to jump over that.
Harry's buying time. He's buying time. He's buying
time for a project that is, and I'm still going to stick to the idea, it's complete vaporware. They're probably doing something with it, but again, talk to one of the developers of The Seventh Guest. He had a barbecue with Shigeru Miyamoto right after they cut the deal to license The Seventh Guest to the Super NES, and Miyamoto just kept talking about how great cartridges were and how, Nintendo needs cartridges and the tactile feel of a cartridge can't be replaced. And then later on they had to buy the rights back to be able to do something with The Seventh Guest, because they missed out on the entire console sales because Nintendo basically just, park themselves on the hot CD-ROM game of the time. But that's another issue.
The tactile feel of the cartridge? Okay.
Oh, yeah. That was that. Miyamoto has actually talked about that a couple of times, that the tactile feel of stuff, like the controllers and, the cartridge, you plug that cartridge in, it's that moment of connecting.
I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you recognize right away that with a CD, the obvious disadvantage over the cartridge is one of cost and storage, and most importantly, speed, because the cartridge loads automatically. It is instant.
I would say that actually the benefit of the cartridge is your hardware can suck balls and you just upgrade the hardware in the cartridge.
You've got leverage there.
That is massive. Well, think about it. Super Mario Kart, the 2-player split screen is only possible because of an add-on chip in the cart.
Right.
They wouldn't be able to pull it off. Now, granted, other programmers actually do pull that off. We get, I can't remember the name of it, there's a 4-player split screen racer later on the Super NES that does not have an add-on chip.
Right.
Because they are pulling it off in hardware. But they can't pull it off initially without this add-on. Right. Same thing with the NES. I mean, any decent NES game has some kind of chip going on inside of it. Be it a music chip, be it a chip to, help with the flicker or whatever. This is why the moment you get to CD gaming, you now are stuck with whatever that hardware is. You really have to pull out all your programming tricks to make it do more.
Right.
Which, it takes Nintendo another 2 generations before they have to confront that problem.
Right.
And
now,
I think
which is the first, though, because of the generation of console players, in as much as they're an actual single generation, and I'm not talking console generation, I'm talking people, but those who have experienced plugging cartridges into consoles, at risk of a segue here, what is the first time that they experience load times with a disc?
Well, I mean, in theory, it's going to be the cassette, the supercharger for the VCS. That's the first time.
Yeah,
that would be the first time. But
wide scale, like it's the Sega is what
it's the Sega CD on wide scale. I mean, you obviously have the load times with the TurboGrafx CD, but I mean that's such a small percentage of the population has played that. It really is the Sega CD is the first major one where everybody, well, not everybody, but at least enough people have to deal with it that it becomes a known commodity. And so that's the first time. And it really takes off. I mean, the first time anybody really has to deal with it is when they buy Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 for the PlayStation. Or was it just Mortal Kombat 3? I think it was just Mortal Kombat 3 for the PlayStation. That was one of the very early titles on the system, and the load times are atrocious.
Right.
Because they really haven't figured out how to do that yet.
We were hardened and steeled by the use of Commodore 64 or 1541 disk drives for a number of years. So when it came to that, but I do know that when the common person who was used to playing their Nintendo had switched to Sega, that became one of the immediate tangible issues was, oh my god, what's going on here? Well, it's loading. It's what? It's loading.
Yeah, and that's when you had to deal with memory and all this stuff for the very first time. And yeah, but so back to the Super NES CD, the new release date is August of 93. They've also cut a deal to license American Laser Games line of Laserdisc light gun games, so this Mad Dog McCree, Space Pirates, and stuff like that. And, of course, none of that's ever going to show up because it's vaporware. And then we also have at the Shoshinkai Andy Eddy, who is an editor for video games and computer entertainment. And this is important because he spends most of his editorial in this month's issue calling bullshit on Nintendo's claims, as they have gotten no confirmation from developers of any games actually being in the making. They've had no previews of software, as would be expected, and Yamauchi's claim that the hardware would be finalized in 93 for a full-scale production of hardware by August of 93 makes no sense given the lead time necessary to create software, let alone CD software. So
I'm sure Mr. Eddy's phone calls not being returned after that was a complete coincidence.
This is the thing. Video games and computer entertainment actually never reviewed any Nintendo first-party titles. This was one of the weird things about that magazine. It's like, Nintendo exists, the NES exists, third-party software exists, Nintendo titles do not exist in this magazine. A couple news articles, like when the Super NES launched and stuff, but that was it. So I'm not quite sure what was going on there. Now, EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly, they go even further. They call Nintendo out on their quote, and they use the word vaporware. And I did not know vaporware was already a term that they would have been using at this point.
Oh, they called it that. Nice.
They called it vaporware. And they say that if they need to keep trying to one-up Sega to not appear to be losing ground, they should just claim that it's 64-bit.
128. Come on. Think big.
Well, I mean, considering that, the Ultra 64 announcement is not that far off into the future.
Right. Yes.
It's around this time that Yamauchi is already, or it's just a few months away from Yamauchi starting negotiations with Silicon Graphics.
Right. And as soon as they announce that, the folks at EGM are on the floor laughing, convinced that they're completely full of it at this point. Then.
And let's face it, the Nintendo 64, for all its many, many wonderful attributes, it's not nearly as powerful as everybody was hoping it would be, and as powerful as Nintendo kept claiming it would be.
Right.
So yeah. And one more thing from EGM, because this was great. And of course, everybody remember, links to all of these things are in the show notes. You can go straight to the archive.org pages to see them. EGM also skewers rumors that Atari will debut the Jaguar at the summer 93 CES with 20 games. EGM's response to this is that 64-bit, quote unquote, yeah, right, and, quote, 20 games without any developers? No way. So
they are, but it turns out they're all just VCS re-releases.
Well, I mean, the only one that they get out early on the system is Tempest 2000. Right. Defender 2000, did that even get a release? Or did that come later? I can't remember now.
You've asked the wrong co-host.
Yeah. But, I mean, they will get some games out, and if you want to know more about all the background on that, please check my interview with head of software at Atari, Mr. Tramiel himself. So, yeah. Okay, so this is it gives us a good view of the console wars at this point with, Sega going the add-on route and actually bringing this stuff out. Nintendo going we're going to add more and more shit to our cartridges route, which ultimately a much better idea. And everybody's trying to one-up the other with the bits. The bit thing is getting more and more outrageous. So, yeah, fun stuff. So, okay, but moving back to Sega.
Well, Sierra is coming to Sega CD.
After dipping
Sierra Online.
Yeah, this is Sierra Online. After dipping their toes into the console market by licensing games to Konami and Sega, Sierra is bringing their adventure games to Sega's CD add-on. Rise of the Dragon and Willy Beamish, 2 Dynamics productions, have already been announced or launched, but now the big guns, King's Quest, Space Quest, and Leisure Suit Larry, are all due for a console release. While the 256-color VGA graphics will be reduced to just 64 colors, new music will be composed to take full advantage of the CD media. Dynamic sci-fi tank shooter Stellar 7 is also set to get a port.
Oh, Roberta, I can only imagine this is going to work out well for you.
Oh, yeah. So none of these non-Dynamics games will actually be launched.
Right.
Even though Sega actually has multi-page ads for this stuff in article format. And neither will Stellar 7. That one's also not going to make it. Sega has its own ad section, like I said, in EGM this month, showing all of this off, but it's all just PC screenshots. And Al Lowe actually mentioned this briefly in my interview with him about how, they were Ken was talking to Sega and the whole, CD thing was going to be, a big deal and getting onto consoles this way, blah, blah, blah. And we've talked about on the show before how Sierra has been pushing hardware add-ons for PCs and trying to sell, sound cards and then CD drives and all this stuff. But I think that the relatively poor sales of both Rise of the Dragon and Willy Beamish on the Sega CD are probably what axed this at the end of the day. Because there just wasn't a market for it. It was too slow. The load times were too inconvenient. The games were too hard to navigate through, especially with a controller. And it just went against the grain of what a game player on a console was expecting. I mean, Monkey Island also gets a port at this time on the Sega CD, but it just doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right, exactly.
Yeah.
I may have misspoke. Are Ken and Roberta even still with the company in November?
No. I interviewed Ken a while back. He wrote a biography about it. They get kicked out. They get kicked out by the late 90s. They're out because he sells out to a larger corporation that turns out basically just to be a sham. Yeah. And the whole thing collapses, and he basically ends up having to leave. And the IP is spread out now. Leisure Suit Larry, there's been 2 new games by a German developer, and King's Quest is in somebody else's hand, and I think that Activision owns a chunk of the IP too now. It's all over the place.
It's a mess. But nonetheless, in November 92, Ken and Roberta are still at the helm here.
They're still at the helm. The whole thing is going great. Phantasmagoria is in production. I mean, they're going full blown into CD. It's going to be, this is going to become like their golden age. The last Susan before first person shooters just completely make point and click adventure games. I'm exaggerating slightly, but are going to make them irrelevant as hardware show off tools.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, this is also around the time, because it's right before Doom is released, when Ken almost buys id Software.
Yes.
So, and then he backs out of the deal because they wanted a paltry 5-figure sum in cash as opposed to just stock. And he's like, well, I would have had to go to the board to get the money, and so I decided not to do it. And, of course, the rest is, as they say, history.
Tandy gets into the CD-ROM set-top game.
Not wanting to be left out of the ever more populated yet mysteriously unpopular set-top box CD-ROM player market, Tandy, parent company of Radio Shack, has introduced their VIS, or Video Information System. The device runs on a modified version of Windows known as Microsoft Modular Windows, which was designed to be used in a variety of consumer products, but apparently only ever got used in the VIS.
What are these words we just said? What is a CD-ROM set-top game? Set-top.
A set-top box. Now, okay, this is the category of devices like Philips CDI, like Commodore CDTV, these CD-based systems that you would install like a VCR on top of your TV or under your TV that were supposed to access information from a CD and put them on your television set.
Right.
And nobody quite knows what they're there for. Like, you could make a digital cookbook for all that's worth. And actually, that's going to get us into the next story in just a moment. But yeah, so everybody is like, well, CD, that's going to be the next evolution of the device for your TV because, VHS is already kind of old. And what can we do with this? And nobody's quite figured it out yet because MPEG compression for video, it eats up too much hardware, too much CPU time to do on the standard CPUs that are being included in these machines. So you'd have to have an MPEG add-on card to make that an option. But everybody's like, well, if we don't have one of these things, we're going to be left behind. And so, yeah, they've done this. Only 11,000 units get sold by some estimates. And according to Byte Magazine, VIS will support Microsoft's upcoming AVI video compression format, which was cool because this was the first time I saw AVI mentioned anywhere. They've been talking about how the new version of Windows 3.1 would have multimedia capabilities for whatever that meant at the time. But, the idea of AVI getting used here, I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, and this is also one of the rare times that something mentioned on the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine did not go down in horrid flames.
Oh, no.
The product, the AVI actually will survive to modern times.
Yes. Now, I couldn't find any confirmation that the VIS actually played AVIs. Because I couldn't find any real confirmation online of any of these VISs still existing, apparently. They must be out there. Only a handful of software titles were developed for it. It's like... Yeah.
You did not make your money back on your 11,000 unit production run.
No. It's just bad. Very, very bad. But, Tandy, they're making so much money off the Tandy 1000s at this point that they don't care. They can risk a gamble or two.
True. And they were a little bit more risk averse, say back maybe a number of years before the success of the 1000. So,
well, they had the TRS-80, and then they tried the Coco and a couple other machines. They had the rebranded handhelds. They had so much success early on with the Trash 80. I think that they were willing to do all this stuff. Granted, they also got burned a little bit because they had their rebranded Intellivision in stock. But I think that, the Tandy 1000, once the Trash 80 was gone, the Tandy 1000 becomes their new big seller. And it's only once, the mail order companies really get into it, which is happening right at this period of time. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a later story, but the Gateway 2000s of this world are beginning to get really, really big. And the prices of PCs are dropping so quickly that it's hard for a brick and mortar retail store to keep up.
Right.
But, oh well. Moving on.
Digital World Conference highlights rough road for digital video.
Computer Gaming World reports on the Digital World Conference, which was a venue for discussion and demonstration of the latest and greatest in upcoming digital video tech. The rise of CD-ROM-based systems has lit a fire under the languishing debate over video compression standards. Philips diehards still hold on to CDI as a universal standard, but without the CPU power to manipulate the data on the mass storage of compact discs, the experiences on offer will remain less than exciting. Committee-based standards like JPEG and MPEG are going up against proprietary systems like Intel's DVI, which requires video be sent to Intel for digital conversion at a per-minute cost. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's gonna work, guys.
Yeah, that's going to fail miserably, of course. But this article was interesting just because the rise of textured 3D environments, the Ultima Underworlds, the Wolfensteins, games like Wing Commander, which actually gets name dropped in this article. When you contrast that with the, slideshow style products that are currently being put on CD-ROM, it doesn't look like CD has much, if anything, to offer. At least the gaming people. And so, without some kind of really good video compression to use the CD-ROM as a source of streaming video, other than the fact that it can hold a lot of data, it doesn't mean anything because, you're currently getting the giant Underworld on floppy disks. You don't need the CD-ROM necessarily. There's no added benefit unless you can crack this problem of image compression and video compression.
Right.
So,
I wonder how much they wanted per minute.
That I'd love to know that too. I can imagine it being Intel. It was probably excessive.
It might be shocking how, because one would think that if you were back in these days running video, you could have asked for perhaps $1,000 a minute or more, like some outlandish price, because it would have been so dedicated a project to have created video to have then given for that kind of demonstration on the computer.
That's the thing, yeah. Why would you need it? What would be the situation where this would make sense in an age of VHS? Because what are you sending them? Are you sending them a Betamax tape? Are you sending them 35 millimeter film? I don't know.
Oh, I'm sure they would handle a multiple variety of formats that they would then hand you back in their DVI. But I can't even imagine the practical uses of what they would think that their customers were purchasing their service for. What is the video you're ultimately going to ship off to the end consumer? Because the end consumer is always going to suffer from the fact that you don't have hardware powerful enough in 92 to run an engaging video for really anything longer than what used to be a Vine video.
Exactly. And it is weird. It is just weird. But, it's also one of these things where at this point in time, nobody knows what's going to be successful. Nobody knows what's going to fail. And thus, give it a shot. Why not?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
This is always the problem. In hindsight, it's easy to say, yeah, that was a dumb idea. But at the same time, who knew, you know?
That's what I'm here for. Hindsight. Hindsight antagonism. How could you not have known?
Sticking with the wave of the future, full motion video.
Well, the Laserdisc gaming is coming to the Amiga.
LDG, a German startup, has released an adapter that allows users to connect an Amiga to a Laserdisc player and play games like Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, and Cobra Command.
No! Oh my god, I'm buying 2.
Oh, dude.
They never release and I can't buy 2.
No, they did release. And they originally launched the hardware adapter a few years earlier, before this even, but couldn't get any additional software beyond Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. Right. And now they're working with an Italian company to get more classic titles and to create new titles for the format. So, yeah, no, I remember seeing ads for this in all the big gaming magazines in Germany at the time, and I was salivating over this. The idea of being able to play Dragon's Lair, which had been such a seminal game in my formative years, just seemed outrageously cool. Now, the fact that you're going to have to buy a Laserdisc player, plus the game, plus the add-on, and still have an Amiga to run on it, it's a ludicrous proposition that makes absolutely no financial sense to in any form or fashion. But these ads ran for at least a few months in the magazines, and there were articles about it in all the big magazines, at least the ones that covered Amiga. So
I feel you could have gotten a used Dragon's Lair coin-op cabinet at that point for roughly a little cheaper than what you could have purchased that setup, because what level of Amiga are we looking at here?
Oh, just even a basic Amiga 500 would do the trick. All right. No, because, I mean, there's not... Let's face it, it's Dragon's Lair. It's just basically... you needed something that would read your your 4-directional joystick input plus a fire button. And then process whether or not you got it in on time in coordination with where you are on the Laserdisc. Mm-hmm. So you could probably pull that off on a C64 for all it's just you had a parallel port on an Amiga, which probably made the connecting to the Laserdisc easier.
Right.
And also the C64, I mean, it's still popular at this point, but it's not popular enough to warrant making a hardware add-on.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
So, but they got at least a few more titles running on this hardware setup, but yeah, I can't imagine too many people actually bought it or had it. But if you had a Laserdisc player laying around, which, I mean, if you were a movie buff in Europe at that time, this would have been the only way to be able to watch like American movies in English, unless you were importing from England. But even then, I mean, that was one of the big allures of the Laserdisc, was the multiple soundtracks.
Right.
So there were people out there who would have had that setup.
Right. Amiga Joe. Am I going on?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
All right.
It's all
Enough
good.
with you, Laserdisc. Amiga Joker previews Amiga 1200. You'll have to explain to me what Amiga Joker is.
Amiga Joker is an Amiga magazine in Germany. It also becomes the most sold Amiga games magazine in the world, and also, as far as I know, the last of the actual Amiga game magazines from the heyday of the machine that survives into the later 90s, until like 97, I think. Nice. It actually survives. So later than all the others. There have been Amiga game magazines, fan projects and stuff later on, but it's the one that survives the longest.
Showing off my Amiga ignorance.
Exactly. It's Amiga in Europe at this point. Consoles really don't have a penetration of any real note. The Genesis has a bit of penetration, but it's still, in comparison with machines like the Amiga, the ST, and the C64, is way behind. So, Commodore has finally decided to upgrade the aging Amiga hardware with the A1200 and A4000, which will premiere at the World of Commodore show in Frankfurt. While the CPUs and data buses will be faster, the original custom Blitter and copper chips will remain unmodified from the 1985 original, with only the AGA graphics chip providing some improvements that would bring the system up to something similar to VGA quality graphics, but without being the revolutionary leap forward the original machine had been.
However, they will increase the price tag.
Oh, yes. I mean, now the 1200 still remains a fairly reasonably priced machine. So you're going to be able to pick up a 1200 for less than, let's say, a high-end, a decent game-playing 386. But it's not nearly going to be as capable as that machine, as the many attempts to do first-person shooters on the 1200 will attest to. So basically, you're going to be able to play Wing Commander 1 on it just fine, but, Wing Commander 2 is never going to show up, and, yeah, the Doom clones are going to have varying levels of quality in their results. Now, the magazine doubts that the A4000 will stand much of a chance, being way overpriced in comparison with equivalent PCs, but the A1200 with its integrated TV tuner, which the A500 didn't have, and new cartridge slot could find a niche as a true gaming machine. And this is something that a lot of the magazines have been talking about for a while, that this is going to have a cartridge slot. They're thinking maybe you could turn it into a console as well, or that it could function like a console. And this is because everybody's thinking, consoles are the thing to beat because they're getting cheaper, better, faster. They're finally at a point where they could compete with these 16-bit computers, so you might as well have to join them. Yeah. Now, the UK magazine Amiga Power reports that the A4000 bowed at the World of Commodore show in Pasadena, California. They've got a bunch of these World of Commodore shows at the time, which took place in September. Now, the Frankfurt version would happen in November. So there's so the A4000 bows in the States. Now, for listeners, the Amiga market in North America is quite literally at this point, and I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's pretty much just the video toaster market. That is the Amiga market in North America. So if you're doing TV production, if you're doing graphics that you're going to put into video feeds, you use an Amiga. There's really no other market for you in North America. In Europe, it's primarily the A500, A600, and so forth, and it's primarily a games machine with some computing functionality on the side. So that's why the A4000 makes sense to premiere in California, but you're going to pretty much ignore the 1200. And while the U.S. show had an attendance of 20,000, the Frankfurt show is expected to bring in 100,000 people. And that really shows you the difference between the sizes in those markets.
Seriously, Europe, this is why I don't understand you, Europe.
Why?
You really... And I was a Commodore kid, is the weird thing. You guys really went hardcore in Europe for the Commodore folk.
Well, you have to remember, there was no console presence, or at least none of any significance. So if you wanted to play video games, you were playing them on a computer, and the Commodore machines, and the post-Tramiel Atari machines as well. It was a keyboard. You could relatively easily plug it into a television set. It functioned like a console. The software was essentially free because most of it was pirated. And
hey, I had to buy my discs.
Yeah, exactly.
Discs weren't cheap.
Yeah.
Buy them in packs of 10.
Oh, you only bought in packs of 10? Oh, you amateur. You amateur.
Hundred lots and 50s were outlandish. Come on. Nonetheless.
But yeah, so it was all, I mean, I knew so many people who had Amiga 500s over here. It wasn't even funny. That was just, I mean, when I was in high school in Germany, and when I left in 94, I knew one guy who had an NES, one guy who had a Super NES, and that was it. Everybody else had at least a C64 or an Amiga at home. That's just the nature of the beast. And then, of course, a slowly but increasing number of people had PCs.
Right.
So, you know, it just wasn't a console world. And Commodore coming out with a new machine, that was huge, you know. Now, several magazines, including CU Amiga, that's another European one, and Amiga World from the States, have in-depth reviews of the A4000 this month. One thing is clear, the dramatic drop in PC prices, a development bite called the news story of the year, will make the $3,700 behemoth a tough sell.
That's understandable. And I was just going to compliment you before we get into that note by suggesting that from my region, North America, that was very much, we were salivating, waiting for those market forces to drive the PC prices down. And it was the kind of thing where literally on each cycle you would assess whether or not, can I afford to invest now in my new PC system, going through your 380 and 486 generations and what are the XT and I'm trying to remember.
I mean, you start off with the XT, then the AT, then the 286, 386, 486,
SD in
and
there
so forth.
Somewhere. Anyway, but yes.
No, ST was the Atari.
Or ST
Atari
is
ST.
What I thought it was. Anyway, aside from that, that's all I remember of this era of computing. Personally, was the Amiga had zero presence. Your option, you would have been seen as an esoteric diehard gamer. And I still came from the Commodore family of C64 owners, knew some people that had 128s and some 500s and 1000 in the Amiga families, but they certainly never latched onto a second generation of Amigas for the computer users that I grew into in North America, that I grew up with in North America for sure.
Well, yeah, and this is why in North America the video toaster becomes the reason to have an Amiga.
Yep.
The problem with the A4000 is it's not compatible with the existing toasters.
Oh, good.
The 4000, as beautiful as a machine it is for many reasons, the AGA chipset was supposed to be the cheaper chipset for the A1200 or maybe even a lesser machine. There was another thing called the AA chipset or AAA chipset, I can't remember, that was, according to one interview I saw with one of the engineers, that was actually going to be somewhere on the level of what the PlayStation would be later on. So it was doing texture manipulations and all this stuff. And unfortunately, Commodore at this point is in such dire straits and has been so poorly managed for so long that that project basically just gets scrapped and they just push out whatever. And so this is why the AGA chipset, it's nice, but yeah, it's not going to revive the system, and it's just going to be one more reason to move to a PC.
Right, and I mean in those days too. Well, I'm trying to figure out, it's $3,700. That's the price tag.
Yeah.
That's about $7,800 plus nowadays, and even then, you could have made a wonderful PC for $3,700 in 1992.
Well, actually, this month's Byte magazine has the first 5 or 6 pages are one big ad from Gateway 2000.
There you go.
And
yes,
it's all set up like a Robin Hood thing where they're stopping the evil guys keeping prices high and stuff.
Nice.
And I think you can pick up a low end 486 for $2,500 with a monitor, and that's it's just not even in the same ballpark.
No.
And so this is why No, it's unfortunately Commodore. It's over. The beauty and majesty of the Amiga chipset, that wonderful, get the most out of the little bit of silicon you have, which was designed in 83, 84, is not something that's upgradable over time the way that the IBM's VGA card was.
Right.
And this is why, it's just, the IBM machine was never a thing of beauty. It was never a masterful synergy of ingenuity and knowing how the timing works and all this stuff. It's just brute forcing your way through the problem. But as with chips getting cheaper, Moore's law and everything else, the brute force approach is upgradable. The artistic approach was not.
That's right. And backwards compatible.
That's the A1200 and A4000 will, for the most part, be backwards compatible. There will be a few problems. Yeah, it's almost entirely backwards compatible, which was also going to kill it because, given the very large install base, not that many people are going to develop specifically for the AGA chipset.
Right.
And the games that do come out are going to, in large part, be overzealous. Like I said, all those first-person shooter clones that are going to come out, games like Alien Breed 3D, where you have to play it in such a small window on the screen in order to get the frame rate okay.
Right.
You just feel like, why am I doing this to myself when Doom is over there and a machine that only costs marginally more?
Yes.
And has a hard drive in it because the A1200 doesn't come with a hard drive? Yeah, you're still loading off of disks for the A1200. Right. You can install a hard drive, but it's not standard equipment.
Meanwhile, I'm playing multiplayer Doom.
There you go.
Acorn bets big on RISC.
As the prices of PC-compatible computers continue to drop with companies like Gateway 2000 and Dell working on ever lower margins, the UK's Acorn is bucking the trend by announcing 5 new computers running their RISC processors. While DR-DOS and other DOS emulators may ship with the devices, Acorn believes that their systems offer such superior performance that the lack of compatibility will not harm them.
Is this like this is the Acorn? Okay, this is the British Acorn company.
Yes, the people of BBC Micro and Archimedes fame, who their PCs are going to go nowhere, but of course their developments of RISC chips are still with us today because of the little thing called ARM, which is basically them.
You have one in your pocket.
I've got one in my pocket.
I have one on your wrist at this point.
I have so many of them at this point. I mean, just alone the 3 Raspberry Pis I have sitting around here and everything else. Yes, I have many, many ARM processors. So, I mean, they're still around. They're betting big, but the idea that people are going to use them for a desktop, if it doesn't run Windows, is a bit of a faulty thought process.
Yes, ran into a similar problem recently with a notebook that we had in the year of our Lord 2021. Just with a Samsung, I believe it was a Chromebook. I'm not 100% sure, but it had an ARM processor in it, and it still continued to complain about 64-bit compatibility with some apps. So the legacy carries on. Thank you, Acorn.
There you go.
All right. Moving on, Sun Microsystems outsources multi-core programming to the rookies? To the Ruskies.
Ruskies.
Excuse me. Did not nail it. The Ruskies.
As a result of the increasing adoption of multi-core processing in high-end workstations and servers, Sun Microsystems has hired 33 top Russian programmers to develop software tools exclusively for them to harness these new CPU architectures. The former Soviet programmers are particularly qualified for the task due to the computer tech limitations they worked under during the Cold War, which forced them to link multiple slow processors together to maximize computing power.
Okay, that's legitimately hilarious.
Yeah, it is. And now, and I've mentioned this on the show before, but here where I live in Germany, in Halle, we actually have a East German computer museum, the Rechenwerk. Everybody, if you're ever in the region, you have to see this place. It's absolutely awesome. And a lot of the machines that they have there are exactly this. So in the Soviet bloc, the primary CPU that they were using all the way up till the end in like 1989-90 was Z80 processors. So the old Zylogs. And because that was the only CPU they could get a hold of, when they were building desktop machines, they would literally just have board after board after board of Z80 motherboards. And then they would create custom operating systems to be able to harness all of these multiple Z80s and make them run in unison to be able to do more complex processes. So, yeah.
The equivalent of something like a mini computer. String maybe 16 of them together and...
Well, it just for a desktop machine, you'd have 5 of them in there.
Right.
I mean, we're talking Z80s running at just a couple of megahertz a pop.
Right.
So you get 5 of them in there. Now you're up to, let's say, 10 megahertz. And now you can actually run a word processor at a decent speed.
Right.
You know? But
provided you can write that word processor for your own OS yourself now, since...
And that's the thing. You have these programmers who have been making this stuff work.
Right.
And now you've got these new systems where, you know, multi-core processing, which nowadays is a given in every machine, but at the time was a new trend. And your Western programmers aren't necessarily used to having to work with this stuff, but here you've got an entire country of people whose economy has just collapsed. They're in desperate need of a job, and they have the skill that you need. So have at it. And it's even better because the Z80 was a clone in many ways of the old Intel chips, and the basic architecture of them is still the same as the Intel chips today.
Right.
So if you can write machine code on a Z80, jumping to a, at that time, modern Intel chip is not that hard. If they had been running off of Motorola 68000s or something, the machine code would have been more difficult to relearn.
Right. And at this point, I believe, for historical clarity, we're only 3 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Exactly. So this is Berlin Wall falls. The Soviet Union itself doesn't collapse for another couple of years after that. But, you know, we literally, the game Crisis in the Kremlin, which was a simulation of a potential military coup against Gorbachev, comes out literally within a month of that thing actually happening. And feels a little prescient at the time. But then, you know, Gorbachev does stay in power after several days of nobody knowing where he is. And I don't know if he's still in power at this point or if he's already abdicated and Yeltsin has taken over. But whatever the case may be, the Soviet Union is collapsing. Shit's hitting the fan, and we're still living with the repercussions today. Yay!
I was drinking age on November 9th, 1989, and had access to a television, and it was a pretty good day, really. It felt good. There were a lot of happy people on my TV, and they were standing on a wall, and it just seemed like a good time to party. It was the end of history.
I remember school closing early that day, and they sending us home because I was actually in a German school in Argentina. And they sent us home, and they were just like, the Berlin Wall fell. And I just couldn't wrap my head around the concept. I was like, what?
Like it collapsed by itself.
I don't quite understand what's going on here. And I got home, and we're watching this on TV, and just like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And my dad, it was weird for him because he was actually in Berlin when they put it up.
Mm.
And he wasn't even at home. He was actually back in Germany at that same time on a visit. So it was like, it's just like, what the hell? But, oh well. Yeah, so fun stuff.
Awesome times. All right.
Okay.
And finally in this category, the venerable Sensible Soccer gets updated.
For just £4, you can trade in your current Sensible Soccer data disk for a newly updated one that includes the latest team stats, new countries formed by the breakup of the USSR, and gameplay tweaks. This will be the beginning of a long tradition that continues to this day.
Finally, you can play as Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine was a standalone country at the time, but I don't know if they had their own team. That I'd have to look up, if they fielded their own team for the World Cup or if it was just part of the Soviet team.
Georgia, Uzbekistan.
Yeah, I don't know.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, all those, Uzbekistan and stuff, Kazakhstan, those were all not independent.
Right.
But, yeah, so Sensible Soccer is, of course...
For you North Americans, pay attention.
Yeah, this was a game by Sensible Software, people who had previously made Microprose Soccer. And, this game, obviously, the original Sensi doesn't get, and that's Sensi is just how the hardcore Amiga people call it, doesn't get updated anymore. Nowadays, it's one of the sequels. Sensible World of Soccer keeps getting updated, of course, by the fans. So you can still play the latest rosters with all the latest stats to this very day if you felt like it. And there's still online competitions. I mean, the fan community around Sensi is huge. So it's kind of cool to see them do this. We've talked a few months back here on the show about how John Hare, one of the developers, 10 years after this, is quite pissy about the fact that nowadays he wouldn't be able to have done what he did with Sensible Soccer, which was include all the real world names and stats because, licensing issues. That just, licensing. Who needs to pay for licensing? Where's the fun in that? But yeah, so it's an interesting moment in time of how to upgrade and update software in a non-online world without paying for licenses. And it really gives just a flavor of the by the seat of the pants, no budget world of European computer gaming software at the time.
I'm looking forward to my 2023 edition with Ronaldo playing for the Saudis.
There you go.
Don't ask me.
Okay, right. Moving on.
We're into a new color. Does this mean a new category?
Now, this is, so we've left computer software, and now we're moving into online gaming.
Online gaming? The 100 Years' War proves costly.
Yeah, the online service Genie's online multiplayer strategy game 100 Years' War gets a multi-page and multi-perspective review in this month's Computer Gaming World. The turn-based game, which was originally developed as a play-by-mail, allows players to simulate being a noble in the high Middle Ages, with dozens of options per turn being available. The steep $6 per hour game price gets steeper when a single turn's decisions, limited by the speed that the dial-up modem connections allow one to navigate between menus, can take up to 2 to 3 hours per day to enter, and a campaign can take up to 400 turns, aka days, to play through.
It's still cheaper than Dragon's Lair. But not by a hell of a lot.
No.
But now, $6 an hour for an addictive online game would probably... There you'd be into your first instances of people having, like, buyer's remorse for online time.
Oh, definitely. And, I mean, the fact that you can't just... I mean, it's turn-based. The fact that you can't just use your offline software to program in all the options and then just send them out as one burst is a bit of a fatal flaw here.
You still would have needed to have connected, though, because you don't have at no point do you have an uninterrupted internet connection. You're still by phone at this point, I figure. So,
well, you are by phone, but I'm just thinking that because they're talking about how like the drop-down menus take time because the content of the menus has to be pulled from the server.
Right.
And I can imagine, the very complex map and everything. If you're going to make a decision about doing something, you need to see the current status of the map, and you may not have enough memory or whatever. I don't know. But this is just this really, really ridiculously overly complicated game that just should not be charged by the hour.
Right, and it's not. The turn-based games are not new. We've been playing chess for a long time now. Surely you could recognize that exactly what's going to happen is you will play your turn, and then you will sit and wait for the next person to play. This has been a problem since chess and Civ 2.
This is very true. And there's a couple of other issues that were interesting here because it had to do with the interactions between the players. So they also talk about how game balancing issues are weird because the player participation, the players select the king of a realm. So each player is a noble, but the players among themselves then have to decide which player noble will become the king of the realm. And if the king of the realm, the person who got elected king, simply drops out and stops playing for a few days,
right?
There's no mechanism for repercussions for this. So, there's certain actions that only the king can take, and suddenly for your realm, nothing is happening because you have an absent king, which, would kind of suck. And there's also an article about play-by-email game forums on services like CompuServe. And they're discussing how to organize and run such games using emails. So, it's the traditional play-by-mail, which we've talked about on the show before, but now you are not sending in the physical stuff on paper, you're doing it by email. So the same exact game mechanics, only now done by email. And how the services like CompuServe are creating the backbone setup to make running that kind of game easier. Right. Which I thought was also interesting because you're starting to see, the idea of these online services, which if you look at the ads for them 10 years earlier in the magazines, it's all about that. Yeah, games are slightly mentioned, but it's all about, pulling up data and all this stuff. They're starting to see the real benefit and the profit of making these games available and letting the players organize the games and be like, yeah, sure, do whatever you want as long as you're paying by the minute. We don't care.
My original early 90s email monopoly idea was an abject failure.
You wanted to play Monopoly by email.
Why not, really? Scrabble.
I can't see why it wouldn't work. No, email is a fast enough service.
Well, we'd have to figure out how the dice would work.
Well, all you'd have to do is the person rolling it, that would be a random number generation. Then that would have to be shared from that person's computer with everybody else's computer via an email message. And then whatever the player decides to do in that turn would also be a second email message.
Oh my God, we absolutely could do. Listen, I remember there were attempts to put Monopoly on a PDP-1. So yes, I'm certain that with enough desire, we could certainly make Monopoly work for email. Yes.
Oh, of course. I'm sure somebody's done it. I am sure. All the board games, that is one that somebody has made an email playable version of.
Nice.
But, yeah. Okay, so we're leaving that. Now let's start looking at some company news.
Companies. Corporations. Maxis establishes specialized subsidiaries. Sounds sus. Subsidiaries.
There you go. Maxis, creators of SimCity, SimAnt, and SimEarth, among others, has started 2 subsidiaries, one to create educational simulations and another for business simulations. They believe that there will be a growing market for such simulations in the near future, as they can teach valuable skills and are a lot more fun than a lecture.
It's true. It's true.
Oh, it is. It is. Just a couple years ago, a game, a simulation that they created, I believe, for an oil company. How to manage certain aspects of the oil company actually surfaced.
Yes.
So I don't know how many games they actually produced in this vein, but it is interesting to see where Will Wright and co. were going with the idea here.
Yes. Actually, it was a couple of years ago that Sim Refinery, which was a private, because it was never released, it was made for, I want to say Exxon, but I'm not 100% sure, did release after a gentleman by the name of Phil Salvador, or Shadesy as he's known online, had written about, he had been tracking it for years. And one of the old engineers had a copy of it. I'm not sure if it should still be publicly available. There was some concerns at the time when he released it, but it was a joy to watch something like that that otherwise was unreleased hit the preservation scene. Particularly for this, for Phil, who had been researching it without ever having seen the finished product for a number of years. So it was a delight to see Sim Refinery in action, even though it was, essentially a private product created by Maxis. I believe they go on to do another, but somewhere in the show notes we can put in Phil's, he has extensive write-ups on that aspect of Maxis's business back in the day.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I'll look that up. I just pulled up the Wikipedia page for it, and it was Chevron that they made it for.
There we go.
Yeah, and it was released in 1993.
Yep.
So, yeah, and it is still available, at least on abandonware.com for download. So I'll put all those links in the show notes, and yeah, but it's fun to see, they're actually announcing that they're going to do this.
Right.
And, hey, more power to them.
Well, I believe their health product, it's not called, is it Sim Health? Yeah, Sim Health is what is released, I believe, from that. But I'm stepping into unknown territory here, which was like an American system health simulator.
Okay. So basically, you just slowly watch how you die.
Well, and you have to maximize profit while slowly watching them die.
Okay. So you're actually simulating the hospital.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and Bullfrog did that as well. So, I wonder which one was more accurate.
I'll be very excited to find out all of the things I've said wrong here today.
Oh, right.
Yeah. In more business news, SSI gets a TSR extension.
Yeah, it sounds like a medical procedure. So, SSI has signed a new 7-year contract with Dungeons & Dragons maker TSR.
Oh, those guys.
This comes as the company is prepping their new D&D game engine, which will premiere with TSR's relatively new Dark Sun game setting and will replace the aging Gold Box engine.
Well,
now
they're not litigative. TSR.
Well, yeah, this is one of those weird ones. So, and again, everybody can go back and check my interview with Joel Billings, founder of SSI, and he goes into this quite extensively. The new game engine that they developed is a huge disaster. It takes way longer than expected, costs a lot more money, and it doesn't catch on. It was sort of an attempt to not make it more console-like, but it does take a lot of the stats off of the screen. And it's, all the action is on screen at once. Everything's overhead as opposed to the first person view. It doesn't really work.
Right.
And, Yeah, and then the Dark Sun setting is also not nearly as popular as, say, Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance, but they're kind of pushed to do that because TSR is trying to push these new properties. They also do Al-Qadim, which was the sort of 1001 Arabian Nights setting. They will, in short order, also have a first-person 3D sort of Ultima Underworld-ish game engine that they'll use for Ravenloft and a Forgotten Realms game, but by then things are just getting weird and they're ultimately going to lose the license to Interplay by 1984. And because they've sort of distanced themselves, they've spent so many years doing the RPG thing but without their own IP, that they find it very, very hard to create games on par with other companies' RPGs that are comparable in quality, and at the same time, that's not really where the company's origins were. They were always a tactical game, but in the age of Doom, nobody really cares about, turn-based strategy is kind of dead. Then you're going to get Dune 2, real-time strategy is in, and SSI just isn't really prepared to fight those battles. But that's another story.
How long have they had this? They've had an exclusive deal with TSR for how long now?
Ooh, we actually talked about them getting the license. So it's probably 88, 89, something like that. So the first Gold Box game, which is Pools of Radiance. And that comes out in... when is that? 1988. Yeah, Pools of Radiance is 88.
So we've had a good, there's been a good 5-6 years now with that SSI and the TSR names. I mean,
exactly
when I see the aging Gold Box reference, that's iconic. I know what that means, even though I probably never owned any of those games.
And that's the thing. They were so ubiquitous because there were so many of them. Then they also had, non-Gold Box games like Hills Far and Dragons of Dragons of Flame or something like that. Then they had the Flight Sim, the Dragonlance Flight Sim. They did the Dungeons the DM assistant programs. They did the online game Neverwinter Nights. I mean, there was just so much SSI output. They even did a turn-based strategy one based in the War of the Lance.
Right.
So, I mean, they did so much with the license. So much of it was innovative and interesting, but ultimately it was just a license, and sooner or later they were going to lose that license.
And just before the Department of Corrections kicks in here, we should also note that we are still in our current time and place 1 year away from the release of Doom.
We are still 1 year away from the release of Doom, but we have Wolfenstein has been around for a while at this point. We have the first ad this month in Interaction Magazine for Spear of Destiny, which is going to be the sequel / commercially available product, the nice big box version of the game. And the Doom engine is already deep into development at this point.
Yes, John Carmack is already making deep magic as we speak. We just don't know about it yet.
Exactly. We don't know about it, but we also know that there's a ton of companies coming out with some form of 3D engine. So Talion in Germany has already announced that their follow-up to Amber Star, Amber Moon, is going to have fully 3D dungeons. We know that US Gold is coming out with Legends of Valor, which will also have a fully 3D environment for the RPG. So everybody knows this is coming. And I believe the Wolfenstein engine, they haven't announced. I haven't seen any announcements for licensees of it yet, but there's stuff coming. everybody knows this is the wave of the future.
Yes.
So, but one more note here: Gary Gygax, co-creator of D&D, and the guy who's been kicked out of TSR for quite a while now. He's licensed his new game system, Dangerous Journeys, to Electronic Arts for the PC and JVC for Super NES and NEC for TurboGrafx-16.
I am so buying all of those.
Yeah, and you would if any of them ever appeared.
Oh.
But none of them ever get released. EA probably because they've just bought Origin and several of their RPG attempts that were happening in-house, including Bard's Tale 4, all basically get canceled once they're like, well, why bother? We have Ultima Underworld and Ultima, so screw it. We're done. And I don't know what happened with JVC and the NEC licenses, but considering that the TurboGrafx-16 is kind of on its way out already, that makes sense. And JVC on the Super NES, I have no idea what's going on now. So none of these will appear, but Gary Gygax does get interviewed about it in EGM, and so I thought it was an interesting little side note here.
Good work, EGG.
Yeah. So now we're switching over to general media or adjacent entertainment.
Like a cultural component to the program? Is that what we're doing?
I'd like to give some context for what else is going on, because video games have traditionally been heavily influenced by other media. And therefore it's good to have an idea of what else is going on in related fields to understand some of the trends that we're about to see.
Absolutely. It's been 10 years. Where's my E.T. sequel, you bastards?
Oh, that's actually, there was an E.T. sequel, and we passed that a few months ago when we were still doing the 20-year jumps.
Oh,
they did do another E.T. game, and that was 20 years ago.
Oh, the E.T. game. I'm talking, I want my E.T. movie sequel. It weren't Gremlins.
We got the book, and we found out he was actually just a potato. I think we can live without that.
He was a botanist. You don't need a sequel, okay?
No. He was a potato. He's an evolved potato.
All right. We'll discuss this offline. In the cultural news,
I'm addicted to spuds.
All right. In cultural news, Superman to die.
Not video game news, but interesting nonetheless for geekdom's sake. The infamous Death of Superman storyline is hitting its climax, with Superman 75 making the quote-unquote death of the Man of Steel. This is in many ways the apex of the comic book boom, which will cost many a poor collector dearly.
Okay, wait a minute. Just at this point in time, how many times have we killed Batman off by November of 92?
Oh, Batman, I mean, well, if you go back through parallel universes and all this stuff, he died in Earth 2, but that was before Crisis in 85, so died at some point earlier. But the main Batman has probably appeared to die who knows how many times. I mean, in comic books, Superman has died 1 billion times as well. It doesn't really matter. But the fact that this was hitting national news, it was on CNN.
That's true.
It was on everything because of the comic book boom. I mean, the speculator market. This is, the Todd McFarlane and all these guys starting Image Comics and stuff. Just this absolute insanity of buying these bagged and boarded comics that will never be worth jack.
Right.
Is happening at the same time as the console war. So it's interesting to put it into perspective, especially because we're about to enter like I said, we have this weird phase with, we've got CD-ROM, we can put a bunch of scanned imagery on it, we can't do much more than that with it. There are several comic book inspired products coming out in this period for this reason. because nobody really knows what to do with it.
We had CD-ROMs, comic books were peaking, communism was dead. It was an amazing time. Also, CinemaWare's Jacobs jumps on the comics bandwagon.
Bob Jacob, original founder of CinemaWare, has merged his development company Acme Interactive with comic book publisher Malibu Comics to form Malibu Interactive. The new company will develop games based on comic book properties including Malibu's Men in Black, as well as music stars who could be incorporated into comics and games.
All right.
Yeah. So, Men in Black does not become a video game from Malibu Interactive, at least. There are Men in Black video games, but that's all related to the movie, which also doesn't have a lot to do with the comics. And there aren't that many comics to begin with, but that's another issue entirely. Don't need to go there. But yeah, Bob Jacob, visionary founder of CinemaWare, who was thinking, make video games that kind of look like movies, largely through the still images and so forth, has now, reemerged and is, jumping on the comics bandwagon just as the comics bandwagon is about to implode. So, not much comes out of Malibu Interactive or any of these attempts, but it is interesting to see how much money they've got and that they're trying to, take these comic book properties and turn them into game assets.
I'm obliged by my nationality to point out that Sandy Carruthers is half Canadian. That's all I got.
Okay, I can deal
Sandy
with that.
Carruthers, the Men in Black comic book artist, which is really the only bit that I know about the original MIB comic book. But, all right.
There you
Dark
go.
Horse gets into games.
Dark Horse Comics, the company that made its bones through movie licensed comics like Alien, Predator, and Star Wars, is getting into games. They have formed a new company, Dark Vision Interactive, with publisher Total Vision Incorporated to create games based on both their licensed and original comic properties.
Well, knowing this is the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, I can only assume that none of that ever comes to fruition.
You are very much correct, yes. Well, the problem with Dark Horse is they quite literally don't have anything of their own.
Right.
It's all, they have some of their own comics, nothing of note, nothing anybody cares about. It's all these licensed properties. And an Alien vs. Predator game for the Super Nintendo has already been announced. The Alien vs. Predator game for the Jaguar has not been announced yet. But, the fact that there's a Super Nintendo game that's side-scrolling, beat-em-up that's terrible, the fact that there's the first-person shooter game for the Jaguar, which is great, the fact that there's the side-scrolling action game in the arcade, which is awesome, and they're all coming from separate companies, shows you just how little control they have over the license, even though they're the ones who created the concept of Alien vs. Predator, but both of those properties belong to Fox, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
And, Star Wars it's in its own little limbo with LucasArts taking it back, finally.
The fallow period of Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, we're right around the time of X-Wing is coming.
Right.
X-Wing is about to be released. By November, it may have actually already been released. It just hasn't been reviewed yet. And, the Rebel Assault is definitely already in production in the background, and so on and so forth. And we do know, and Super Star Wars for the SNES has already come out.
Right. Next. Yeah. EGM wants you to rat on pirates. Screw you, cop.
There you go. That's the attitude. The public defender in me is very happy. So, this month's Electronic Games Month. This month's Electronic Gaming Monthly's letter to the editor announces that the magazine has instituted a new policy against running ads from those selling equipment for pirating games and requests that those readers who are aware of such sellers contact the editors directly to help them put an end to this kind of crime.
Man, you cheapskates. Asking them to sell, not even giving a reward? You didn't even offer a little hoosh money here for my rat efforts? Man.
Yeah.
That's weak sauce, EGM. Shame.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, this is in contrast with, listeners may remember last month in the October 1992 jump, we talked about how multiple German gaming magazines had these long articles about these new devices that allows you to download cartridge games onto floppy disk and back them up and stuff. And just, you know, they did have, you know, some input from lawyers, you know, talking about the possible illegality of this, but they had no problem, you know, giving addresses of where you can order the devices and so on and so forth, because, you know,
we're mostly we're talking about ROM dumping technology here. Is that the right.
There were these. This was a thing at this point. These add-ons that allowed you that either incorporated a 3.5-inch floppy drive or allowed you to connect the console to a PC and do the ROM dumping onto the hard drive.
Right. Interesting. Well, I wonder what an FBI raid of the EGM offices in November of 92 would have yielded.
That is an excellent question. I do not
Probably
know.
Nothing. Probably would have come out completely clean, I suspect.
Probably. Now, I mean, and also, this is always limited because unless the ROM dumping hardware also included the extra chips, a lot of these games are never going to be dumpable.
Or functional. I suppose you could take
functional,
to the chips, but you're never going to be able to institute that on a playable system in software.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things where Nintendo has a distinct advantage over Sega at this point.
Right.
Now, in a side note, over 50 software developers were represented at a congressional hearing on a proposed law that would increase the penalties for software piracy. And, software piracy legislation, at least in the U.S., has been evolving the last 10 years quite considerably, and there is this move to be tough on crime, to try to increase the penalties. And some of these efforts will lead to those laws that the music industry later would use to, you know, prosecute the grandmas, you know, for downloading MP3s and stuff.
Grandma knew what she was doing.
Oh yeah, Grandma's a lively one. You know, she remembers ragtime. She knows what it was like. You know,
it was like stealing a player piano roll, Grandma. You're not supposed to do it. All right. That's why we have copyright.
There you go.
All right, and finally, I'm going to see if I can pronounce this. Is it Zap 64 or is it?
No, just Zap. It's just called Zap, but yeah.
No Zed. Zap 64 from the UK.
No,
I'm
just
Canadian.
Zap
We
64.
still sort of say Zed. Okay, Zap 64 comes to an end.
Long-running UK C64 mag, Zap 64, breathes its last this month with issue 90. Started in 1985 and having suffered a serious revamp after about a year earlier, the aging mag leaves this mortal coil but will be replaced by Commodore Force.
That strikes me that is the UK's equivalent of what would have been Compute on this side of the pond, as it were.
No, Zap 64 was always just a games mag.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or almost exclusively a games mag. You know, they occasionally have some weird article in the back about graphics or something, but nobody really cared.
Right.
And Zap 64, I mean, nowadays they still do like the Zap Annual and stuff. That's kind of been brought back in the last 6-7 years. But yeah, so what happened was that the C64 in the UK at this point has been relegated to, like, you know, kid brother computer. They never really moved away from tapes. So, like, you buy the magazine and there's 2 tapes full of games or game demos every month.
Right.
And so it's this really, really cheapo magazine or a system that qualifies as a super, super cheapo computer for playing games. And there's still a market for this, but what happened was that a new magazine showed up a couple years ago. We talked about it here on the show, which kind of stole their thunder, went with a very weird design. If you look at it nowadays, it's just garish as hell. It's that early 90s, we have Illustrator now and PageMaker, and we can do things, and it looks sometimes really, it's hard on the eyes. It's really hard on the eyes.
Part of it.
Yeah, you know, why is there an image, a fuzzy, grainy image behind the text, making the text almost impossible to read? You know, that kind of crap.
Yeah, the halcyon days of graphics design is my passion.
Yeah, exactly. And so they revamped Zap to look just like this other magazine. That apparently has not helped sales enough, so now they're changing the Zap name and changing it to Commodore Force, because apparently the kids don't know it's a Commodore magazine if it's called Zap 64. And yeah, it's going to last a little bit longer, but not very much. And you know, in a couple of years, all of these Commodore magazines are going to be gone, unfortunately, but they still have a little bit of life as a trickle of new games are still showing up on the system. And that's it for this time. So, we have no more stories, but there's one more task that the intrepid co-host must still fulfill, which is to give us the word of the episode.
Okay, where's that?
Oh, it's not written anywhere. You've got to come up with it. What do you think is the word of the episode?
I need a word to encapsulate
one word
this.
That encapsulates the true spirit of this episode of November of 1992.
So it's either a toss-up between halcyon or communism. I feel we've run those two themes, but an end
halcyon
of history
communism.
They don't go well together.
No.
Working on polar opposites. What could it be? Disc.
I love it. Disc it is. Okay, so I hope everybody's had a good time. I know we've had a good time.
I sure have.
Or at least Dale is pretending he did. So
I have. Thank you very much for this. It's been awesome.
Dude, it has been a pleasure. I should have done this way, way earlier, but oh well. Next time we get into a weird FCC situation, we'll have to do another special or something.
That's what we do.
Okay, everybody, remember, if you like what we're doing, support us on Patreon. Check it, all the show notes, all the links, and all that good stuff. And if you do want to watch more, the interview episodes are up early. We got a 2-parter with Servan Kianjic, creator of Direct3D, and also a debate between him and Casey Muratori, a longtime game developer, on the battle back in the day between Direct3D and OpenGL. Those interviews are up on for Patreon subscribers already, as well as my interview with Martin Wheeler. And you can also watch the video versions of our 2-part Crash episodes. And, of course, the video version of the 7 Minutes in Heaven.
Available for a low price of $1 a month if you're a cheapskate like me. Come on, people.
Exactly. There you go. Come on. It's $1 a month, everybody. It's barely covering the cost. It's just a sign of appreciation. So, okay, everybody. Dale, it's been a pleasure, and have fun.
Thank you, sir.